Hello and welcome again to the Hauger History Podcast with Mr. Hauger. I am the second part, and today we're here with episode 43 and a review of 8 critical Enlightenment thinkers. Actually, they're pretty significant. Anytime one person can affect the course of history, especially in a way of philosophy and not in a way of violence, I'm all about learning about it. Here are 8 important Enlightenment thinkers. If you're in my classroom, I'm going to ask you to pick out 1 or 2 of a special interest, and you're going to be picking a quotation and kind of giving me a verbal dissertation on why this person was so influential, and more importantly, because it relates to your life, why is it important to you? Why does this person's impact still have an effect today? Let's get started with Thomas Hobbes. In nature, people were cruel, greedy, and selfish. They would fight, rob, and oppress one another. This was a view of Thomas Hobbes, and to escape this, people needed to be part of a social contract. They needed to give up their freedom in return for the safety and order of an organized society. To be part of this benefit, they needed to be part of the betterment of society. Take a look at Hobbes. Look at him. He kind of looks like he's looking very seriously even in this picture, this portrait that we have of him. His most famous work was called Leviathan. Hobbes has been used to justify absolute power in government. He thought that you needed to, because people were inherently evil, give power and support to the government in order to make society function in a way that worked. Hey, his human view was kind of negative or pessimistic. For example, I kind of think the world is more good than bad. The way things function, the way we have order in our society, even though I acknowledge that there is disorder, Hobbes was much more negative or pessimistic. He thought that life without laws and control would result in us all being solitary, poor, and really just destined to have a short society because it's not going to work. He thought government needed absolute power. Here's a couple quotes. A man's conscience and his judgment is the same thing. And as the judgment is, so also the conscience may be erroneous. Meaning like we have faults. Curiosity is the lust of the mind. That it's kind of foolish to be curious. And in the state of nature, profit is the measure of right. Kind of sounds like a capitalist. John Locke, moving on, talking about capitalism. He believed in natural laws and natural rights. And at birth, the mind is a tabula rasa, or a blank tablet. Everything we know comes from the experience of the senses, or empiricism. We can use our senses and interpret the world around us. That we're born with rights because they are a part of nature. And they're part of our very existence. They come from God. So that was John Locke. And man, check out that flowing hair on Locke. His most famous works are the 2 treatises on government. Rulers and governments have an obligation, a responsibility to protect the natural rights of the people that it governs. If a government fails in its obligation to protect natural rights, the people have the right to overthrow that government. Man who believed in freedom. His ideas influenced Thomas Jefferson, and more than anything else, Jefferson wrote the U.S. Declaration of Independence in 1776 based on the theories of John Locke. Pretty important stuff. Locke justified revolution in the eyes of the founding fathers. He thought that other revolutions in France were also deserved when they would give rights to the people. Here's a couple quotes from Locke. No man's knowledge here can go beyond his experience. All mankind being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, or possessions. Thanks for looking out for us, John. We kind of owe you a debt of gratitude in the United States. Jean-Jacques Rousseau. People are basically good, but they become corrupted by society, like the absolute monarchy that was going on in France at the time. Now, for Rousseau, the social contract was the path to freedom, that people should do what's best for their community. People should feel an inherent sense to do what's right for the people around them. His most famous work was The Social Contract. He questioned authority, and anytime there was absolutism, Rousseau kind of turned his head and asked, what kind of political and economic oppression would happen if people become too powerful? And he was really passionate about that power. He influenced revolutionaries, both middle class and lower, later in his life. Here's just a couple quotes from Rousseau. Again, you go out and find some more. There's a ton from Rousseau. Man is born free, and everywhere he is in chains. Force does not constitute right. Obedience is due only to legitimate powers. In other words, question things if they start limiting your freedom. And free people, remember this maxim, we may acquire liberty, but it is never recovered if it is once lost. Meaning, don't ever let your rights get taken, because you'll never Get them back. Montesquieu, moving along our list. He strongly criticized absolute monarchy also as a voice for democracy, believed in the separation of powers. He said the best way to protect liberty was to divide the powers into three branches: legislative, executive, and judicial. Something, again, that we built into the checks and balances of the United States in our country. Look at Montesquieu. He knew that balance needed to come with power in different departments. He wrote the Persian Letters, and he wrote Checks and Balances. He greatly influenced James Madison and the founders of the United States as well. 2 quotes from Montesquieu. The spirit of moderation should also be the spirit of the lawgiver, meaning law people need to be careful in the enactments that they produce for the people. And 2, useless laws weaken the necessary laws. So we have to have a certain amount of laws, but you start taking in too many, and you cut the initial interpretation, and you might limit the rights of people or the way in which we live. Interesting stuff. This has all sounded very familiar to modern America, isn't it? It starts in this part of the year that I start getting excited about history, propelling you on through 8th grade when we learn about modern U.S. history. Voltaire advocated freedom of thought, speech, politics, and religion. He fought against intolerance, injustice, inequality, ignorance, and superstition, and he attacked the aristocrats who got too rich, corruption at the highest points, and prejudice when it came in different areas, and he was very much against the slave trade. Look at that smile he's got on there. He was working well ahead of his time in the way that we think now. Voltaire often used razor-sharp humor, something I like to do as well. I know I'm not comparing myself, just that I also enjoy doing that. See? It's a joke to think I would compare myself to him. Now, in turn, was that also a joke? Because I am starting to smile because I thought that was funny. So look, he used his wit and sarcasm in his writings. He's a very sharp guy. Here's 2 quotes. My trade is to say what I think. I would love it for anybody to just have that as their mindset. You know what I do for a living? I say what I think. That's pretty cool. And it's one of the great perks of being a teacher, and I love working with my students. Quote 2. I do not agree with the word you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. That's a Voltaire quote. Can you believe that? You've heard that before. Awesome. Voltaire has some of the best quotes in history. Here's one that our history book doesn't have, but I'll present to you. Denis Diderot. This philosophe worked 25 years to produce a 28-volume encyclopedia. Well, what's the big deal? It was the first one. Dude was way ahead of his time. It wasn't just a collection of articles either. It was about human knowledge. It was intended to change the way people thought. And a lot of people wrote articles for him and were produced in his encyclopedia. So Diderot, we owe you a wealth of gratitude, and you deserve more than a Wikipedia page. I've had to mention you here. Here's 2 quotes. There is only one passion, the passion for happiness. That's an excellent life quote, isn't it? And 2, every man has his dignity. I'm willing to forget mine, but at my own discretion and not when someone else tells me to. Dude, what a cool guy. Thank you, Diderot. Mary Wollstonecraft. Ladies, let's bring in at least one important thinker here. We're going to talk about a lot more in class. She argued that women had not been included in the Enlightenment slogan, free and equal, and that she thought they'd been excluded from the social contract as well. Her arguments met with scorn because even when men were progressing from all different groups and societies and races, women were still lagging behind, unfortunately, in history of modern nations. And even enlightened men, she felt, were leaving her and her compatriots and her colleagues behind. And she wasn't happy to just be content with that. She wrote A Vindication of the Rights of Women in 1792. She believed in equal education for girls and boys. Only education could give women the knowledge to participate equally with men in public life. What an absolute influential role model. Here's a couple quotes. They're a little lengthier. She wasn't one for the soundbite. She was one for working for equality, and she knew how to use the right words to do it. A great writer. If women could be educated for dependence, that is, to act according to the will of another fallible being and submit, right or wrong, to power, where are we to stop? And 2, the divine right of husbands, like the divine right of kings, may, it is hoped, in this enlightened age, be contested without danger, meaning we should be able to speak our minds without being afraid. Here's someone that wasn't afraid of an unregulated market. This is Adam Smith, the father of capitalism, a Scotsman, and he was an advocate of laissez-faire, or hands off, let go, let pass, let the market run. His theory was that the natural laws of economics will handle itself. We don't need a lot of regulation and government getting involved in our business. We need to let this capitalism market run, let the bulls go. He wrote The Wealth of Nations. He argued the free market of supply and demand should drive economies, and the hidden hand of competition. See how I hid my hand? That's pretty cool. There's that wit again. The hidden hand of competition was the only regulation an economy needed. He said, "It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from the regard for their own interests." Meaning people, when they're let to do what they will power an economic system that will work if we let them. Their passion will make the market. And two, the rich divide with the poor the produce of all their improvements. They are led by an invisible hand to make nearly the same distribution of the necessaries of life which would have been made had the earth been divided in equal proportions among all its inhabitants. Dude was a smart businessman. So those are some significant figures, 8 of them to be precise, in the Enlightenment. I hope you learned something in your review. Check out the Hauger History Podcast often for regular episodes. So glad you tuned in. Subscribe and like our video to keep us going. It's free. You can follow us on Twitter as well, at Hauger History. And we'll see you next time. For now, push in your chairs. And thanks for listening. Hope you learned a lot. This is Mr. Hauger saying we'll see you next time, Hidden Hand.